Welcome to the Gaudium et Spes podcast, where every other week we bring you Catholic teachings and stories of faith from people throughout the Diocese of Pensacola-Tallahassee. Now, here are your hosts, Suzanne McNinch and Chez Filippini.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Gaudium et Spes podcast. I am here today in the studio talking to friends from afar over in Tallahassee, Deacon Andy and Kate Grosmaire. It's going to be a wonderful episode on our final episode in the series on the spiritual works of mercy. This will be on bearing wrongs patiently. So, Deacon Andy, Kate, thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for having us.
It's great to be here.
Great. Absolutely. Well, guys, I'm here in the studio alone. Suzanne McNinch, my co-host, is unfortunately battling a sinus infection and is kind of losing it this moment. So we need to pray for her, but she was unable to appear today. If you have not listened to our previous episode, it was a great exploration of praying for the living and the dead and other of the spiritual works of mercy with Bishop Walk. So please go back and check that out and share that with your friends and family. Deacon Andy, Kate, we always start the show with the first line from Gaudium et Spes, paragraph 1, the Great Vatican II document, which goes, "The joys, the hopes, the griefs, and anxieties of the men of this age, especially those who are poor or in any way afflicted, these are the joys, the hopes, the griefs, and anxieties of the followers of Christ." So we were talking before the show. You guys were just, I don't know what else is going on in your life, but you just had a nice little family vacation over in Jekyll Island. I don't know what else is happening in your life right now, but yeah, what's going on?
This is the Easter season, so it's a very busy time for me as a deacon in the church, getting ready for Holy Week coming up, starting Sunday with Palm Sunday, and very excited about that. A full week of great, wonderful liturgies at the Co-Cathedral of St. Thomas More. And also, my daughter is traveling to Vietnam for a wedding, and very excited about her being able to see the Far East, and very exciting times for her.
So the Easter season is doubly special for us because it does coincide with the death of our daughter Anne, which we'll be talking about. And so she was shot on Palm Sunday and she died on Good Friday. So each year we have not only Holy Week takes on that special meaning for us, but as you know, Easter comes at different times every year. So the anniversaries, the actual dates don't always coincide. So sometimes it feels like we're going through everything twice. But Holy Week changed for us definitely 15 years ago.
Wow. Yes. So that is the substance of our topic today, is this event that happened in your life, in which, to tell the truth, guys, I was, when it actually happened, my wife and I had already left Tallahassee. We were up in Virginia. I'd known of you guys when we were in town, but I heard the story, and it was just such a mind-blowing testament to the power of faith, to the power of Catholic faith in the midst of tragedy. So it's always something that's been on my mind as an example of, especially for us as we were Florida State kids, how robust and amazing the Tallahassee Catholic community was, and just kind of the incredible people there. So, well, looking ahead, guys, that is what we're going to talk about. I want to get a little bit to know you all before the events that we're going to talk about today. So I don't know, how'd you guys find each other? How'd you guys get together? Maybe a little bit of your faith backgrounds as individuals, if you grew up Catholic or somebody's a convert. So yeah, take it away.
We always say that God ordained us to be together because even though we didn't grow up in the same neighborhood or go to the same school, there were so many coincidences in our early life and people that we knew in common, but we actually didn't meet until we were in college. I am a cradle Catholic. My parents had 5 kids, 2 boys and 3 girls. Andy grew up Presbyterian, but he also had 3 boys and 2 girls, 3 girls and 2 boys in his family. So we both came from large families. We both came from very faithful families. His father was an elder in the church, and he went to church every Sunday and went to Sunday school. I went to Catholic school for 8 years before I attended a public high school. But we actually met at a wedding at the reception because it was college. It was at a pizza place. And I remember him walking in with 2 bottles of champagne, 1 in each hand. And he just bounced up to the table and looked at me and said, "Do you want a piece of cake?" And that was really the start of it. So we dated for about 2 years, and we did get married in the Catholic Church. And he, at that time, didn't know he had a desire to become Catholic. It hadn't been revealed to him yet. And we had our daughter Sarah and our daughter Allison. We baptized both of them in the Catholic Church. We moved to St. Pete, Florida. And when we went there, we joined the Methodist Church. I felt like it was this compromise somehow between the Catholic Church and the Presbyterian Church. And so our third daughter, Anne, was baptized in the Methodist Church. However, when we moved to Tallahassee, I always felt this longing to come back. I felt like I was a Catholic in the Methodist Church. I didn't ever really feel like I was a Methodist. So one weekend, while he was out of town, I brought the girls to Good Shepherd Catholic Church. And I tell people I learned something that day. Don't sit too close to the front, and don't let your kids sit on the end of the pew, because Anne got up and went in line. You know, she's just following the people in front of her, and her sisters got up and followed her. And when I got up to the priest, he leaned over and he says, "They're not Catholic, are they?" And, you know, it kind of stung me. And I went to explain it to him afterwards, and he said, "Just take them to RE." And that's the truth. You know, I had baptized the first two, but I had never really raised them in the faith. And so when Andy came back, I told him, you know, I need to fulfill my obligation of raising the girls in the church, and started coming with them. And I'll let you take it from there.
Sure. That was Father Tom Guido, who's currently at the Church of Resurrection in Destin, who was the priest at Good Shepherd at the time. So, yes, I was very upset about it. And, you know, because that seemed like a major decision in our married life. And I felt like she had done it without me, and done it when I went out of town. So I was not happy with her. But I went on a Christ Renews His Parish weekend at Good Shepherd. The night before, I'd said no many a time to the people calling me. And finally, on Thursday night, they called, and I picked up the phone, and I just said, "Yes." And the person on the line said, "I haven't asked you a question." I said, "I know, but the answer is still yes." And so it was definitely a Holy Spirit moment, because the person was inviting me to the Christ Renews His Parish weekend. And so I went, had no idea what I was getting into. I didn't even take a change of clothing, because I didn't even know I was staying overnight. And I went through that weekend, and came back the following 6 months and prepared to give the weekend. And on the giving weekend, 6 months later, they always ask two questions. What do you want God to reveal to you on this weekend? And what do you want God to reveal to you after the weekend? And so I asked him, I said, "What do you want from me, God, after this weekend?" And I heard him say to me, "Become Catholic." So I said, "Okay." And I went home, and I joined my daughter's RCA class, which was actually the adult class, because she was 15 years old. And she was too old to be in the younger kids class, because she was asking difficult questions for the younger kids to understand. And so they put her in the adult class. And so I joined her there, and told my spouse, who was quite surprised about it. And but she supported me on the way. And I came into the church on Easter Vigil in 2001 under that would have been Bishop Ricard.
Wow. Kate, I have to ask, how were you actively praying for Andy for a conversion moment like that? Were you behind the scenes in this whole thing?
Well, I had gone on a Christ Renews His Parish retreat 6 months before that. So in preparation for our weekend, there was another woman, both she and I had the same desire. So every week we would pray that our husbands would go on the trip weekend. I of course, could not ask it of him, you know. And I always tell people, I said, I prayed that he would meet good Christian men, because not that his work environment was so negative, but that was just my desire, that he would meet good Christian men. And then, of course, from going on the church weekend, he not only became Catholic and met the men on that weekend, but, you know, now as a deacon, I said, I tell people I stopped praying that prayer when he went on the weekend, but God never stopped answering it and continues to bring good Christian men into his life.
Yeah. Good Shepherd, as we know, such a vibrant community, and even to this day, that Man Is You program, we had them on a podcast episode, just a really, really strong group of Christian men that has helped countless individuals over the years find their home in the church. So that's really cool. I just want to say really quick, do you want some cake is a great pickup line. And I'm going to make sure that for marriage preparation days, I keep that in there, with bottles of champagne, by the way, cake and champagne. That is the perfect way to find your spouse. Oh man. Well, your father being an elder in the Presbyterian community, you kind of maybe see how a married vocation with ordained ministry can go together. So tell us how long it took to discern and think about becoming a deacon.
Yeah. So I joined the church in April of 2001. And in 2002, I believe, they were discerning a new class. And I went and I found out that you have to be 5 years a Catholic before you join a diaconate class. So they said no. But, I still had that fire of the Holy Spirit in me from joining the church and receiving Christ in communion and being confirmed. And I started serving the church in many different ways. I helped put on a small Lenten group quite a long time ago, and it was quite interesting. I was a new Catholic, and all these people were in this discussion about putting on this Lenten retreat, of small Christian communities. And people like Michael Sheedy, all these people who powerful Catholic men, I would say, and things like that. And they all passed. And I remember thinking, okay, God, if I say yes to this, you have to do all the work, because I don't know what I'm doing. And why would you pick me? And so he picked the foolish, the lowly, and it was a great thing. And so I started serving the church in many ministries. Certainly as a servant, that was certainly my one of my vocations. And over the time, people used to call me Deacon Andy, and it's kind of a joke, But part of it, your discernment is your community discernment, and so I actually used that as part of my application. And I really enjoyed serving the church. It really felt, I felt joy in that and peace. And I felt like I was doing the good works that Christ was calling me to. And so in 2008, I joined that class. And 5 years later, was ordained in June 2013.
Very cool. I know that process. We've had a number of deacons on to explain that process. Can be an all-in family experience. Was it fruitful? Was it joyful? Was it busy? I'm assuming, especially for you, Kate. I don't know what it was like to watch Andy step into, not just convert and become a Catholic, but to step into the role of the diaconate. How's that experience?
Our girls were in high school. I think Sarah had graduated, but the other two were still in high school. The weekends, I would come with him. I remember one weekend was Anne's prom, so I was able to stay home. So it is, he could probably speak more, on the academic side, but it is a commitment, not only for the man, but for the wife and the family.
I asked all my daughters
sure.
if I could join Chez, I asked their permission. And so I felt like, giving them the chance and what it might be, because you're right, I didn't know what was going to happen. It was difficult to have family, work full time, and then be committed to studies every week. And the amount of reading was incredibly overwhelming. And I hadn't been a student in 25 years. And so you have to start writing term papers. And that was a skill that I had forgotten, and it took me about a year to catch up. But I did, and it became easier. And Kate came to me on, like you said, 99.9% of the weekends, and it was awesome. It was just, I grew. And I told our formation director, I said, if I come back for the third year of a 5-year program, I said, I will show up with new liturgy books. Because I was using, I'd actually borrowed some liturgy books from someone else. Actually, it was Pete Cowdery. I borrowed liturgy books from him. And and at the end of the second year, I really had to think about it and said, am I going to come back? And so I did. I bought new liturgy books for myself. And it's difficult because you realize that it's a lot of responsibility to be that face of the church, to be that person of the church. And, and I finally realized it was just like the putting on the that first presentation of that small Christian community at Good Shepherd. It was kind of like the same prayer. God, I don't know what you're doing, but if we're gonna do this, you have to do all the work. And to this day, he has still done all the work.
Beautifully said. What a wonderful. Yeah, thanks for your openness to that. And I know it is such a commitment. I love the idea of asking not only your wife, that's the primary discernment, is my spouse ready for this, but also your daughters too, because it is, just being able to say like, oh, my dad's a deacon in the church, just a little bit, not that people look at you with a raised eyebrow, but yeah, I mean, that's a huge impact on them as well. So I love that. Well, we'll go straight into, so this series we've been doing on the spiritual works of mercy, and trying to get as many kind of personal testimonies of Catholics living out the reality of the spiritual works of mercy. So we've had a person who does grief share over here talk about the experience of losing a spouse and this idea of how you comfort the sorrowful. We've had Father Kevin McEwen, another Tallahassee amazing product, sit down with Bishop Bill to talk about counseling the doubtful and how you do these sorts of things in his own priestly ministry. But this experience that you guys have in bearing wrong patiently, as again I said in the beginning of the episode, is probably the most intense or wow personal testimony I've ever heard about bearing wrongs patiently, how to forgive others in seemingly impossible circumstances. So if you guys want to tell the story, how this event transpired, this tragedy, and then how you move through it and the fruits you've seen from how you've borne these wrongs patiently.
I was in the middle of formation. I started in 2008, and this was Lenten season of 2010. It was, as Kate said, I have to think about this. It was I remember Saturday night before Palm Sunday, my daughter came home and said that this was Anne, and she was 19 at the time, and she was dating a young man named Connor, who had just in the prior 4 months had asked me for a blessing for her hand in marriage, which I had given. She came home, was all excited. She had gone to the local community college, Tallahassee State College, and she had made the dean's list, and she was very excited, and she was going to go out and celebrate with Connor, and she wanted to make her favorite dinner for her, which was fettuccine with shrimp. That was her favorite dinner, and so she asked me to make that, and I made that for her. And she, the next time I saw her, she was in the hospital. Sunday morning, or I should say Sunday afternoon, heard a knock on the front door, and opened the door, and there was a sheriff's deputy and another woman standing there. And I don't know about you, but the first thing I thought about when I saw the sheriff's deputy is, I didn't do anything. Felt a little guilty about it. So, and I said, can I help you? And they said, we would like to come in, and where's your spouse? And I said, okay. And I said, I'll get her. And so they came in, and they told us that our daughter had been shot and that they were there to take us to the hospital. And at that time, we know, as I said, she'd gone out to celebrate with Connor, and we thought, well, she's not at her job, which is working at a baby boutique, because they were closed on Sunday. And so we thought, so we asked them, I said, was Connor with her? And that's when they told us that Connor is the one that shot her. So we'd gone upstairs to change our clothes. And while we were up there, Kate says, we should pray because we need to pray. And so we prayed for Anne, health and recovery. And we also prayed for Connor. as a little hint of foresight from the Holy Spirit. And so we came down and we went to the hospital.
They put us in this little tiny room, and there were no windows. We were confused even about what time it was because daylight savings time had just changed that day. And finally, the doctor came in with a nurse, and he told us that Anne had been shot through her right eye with a shotgun. Now, I knew enough about shotguns. I thought, how could you be that specific? And he said, she's in very grave condition. It's a miracle that she's alive. I honestly could not see the miracle. I didn't know why he said that. It was just devastating news, and I didn't know how to process it. So they took us back to see her, and her entire head was bandaged. She had a tube down her throat. She had a bandage on her right hand, which is a defensive wound from the gunshot blast. And I honestly didn't recognize her until I saw a little freckle on her hand. It was just a woman lying on a stretcher. Out of the shadows literally came the deputy sheriff, who told us that Connor had been arrested and was in the jail. And, it was just in that moment all about getting Anne, the care she needed at the time. We had already started calling people and asking them to pray for us. We called our daughter Allison, was in Orlando. Our other daughter, Sarah, at the time was in Pensacola in school. So we made those phone calls, and immediately, before we even went upstairs to the neurointensive care unit, people from church had started coming to the hospital to be with us. We had a friend, again, from Good Shepherd, who was having to be a nurse at TMH, and she came down, leading us through the back hallways. Here's, the shortcuts. And by the time we got upstairs, there had to be 24 people over the next couple hours that just started showing up to be with us and pray with us. And I remember saying, people are, is there anything you need? What can we do to help? And I'm half in shock still. And I just said, oh my gosh, we were going to go to the store and get cat litter today. We have 3 cats and no cat litter. And later that night when I came home, there was literally 100 pounds of cat litter on the porch where people had immediately gone out to get cat litter. The community response was so amazing. I told Andy, I said, I think if we said we needed a new house, somehow we would get a new house. People were just that responsive to what we needed. With prayer and support, I told people every tear that someone else cried was one less tear that I had to cry. And people, how did you do it? I'm like, we were carried by our community through that week. Certainly that first night, there were many people. I would say there had to be at least 24 people there. And so one of us, and it was Andy, was out with the people, and I was in the room with Anne. And someone came in the room, and I was looking at him, and I was thinking, oh, is that someone from church? Is that someone from work? And it turned out it was Michael McBride. It was Connor's father. And I remember I asked myself, can I go to him? And I stood up and walked around the foot of Anne's bed. And then I thought, can I embrace him? And that was the word. It was embrace him. And I did. And it was absolutely the Holy Spirit leading me around the foot of her bed to embrace Michael. And I really feel like that was the start of my forgiveness journey. I'm a head person for some reason. And, over the course of my life, I'm a secular Franciscan. And so, Francis loves animals, but there's a lot more to Francis of Assisi than his love of animals. He asks us to live a gospel life 24/7. So we promise to live as Jesus lived, to love as he loved, to forgive as he forgave. And when I made my profession as a Franciscan, I remember specifically praying for patience and forgiveness and, help with forgiveness. And from that as well, participated in the healing ministry at Good Shepherd Church, where Deacon Andy and I would pray with people, and we could see how if people could come to that place where they could forgive, then they found peace on the other side of that. So these are the things that are going through my mind is sort of my past experience, my past knowledge, my past, counseling, where they always tell you to forgive your husband, and did a lot of practice on him. So when I prayed and when I thought about what does Anne want for us, the answer always came back, Anne wants peace. So I was like, well, if it's peace that she wants, then it's got to be forgiveness. So I just kind of knew in my head, it was like, it was all book learning sort of. If I want to do this, I will have to forgive, and that's where the peace will come from. Tuesday night, Michael and Julie both came up to the hospital, and that was the first time I saw Julie. And when I saw her, I told her, I said, I cannot define Connor by this one moment, because if I define Connor by this one moment, then I'm defining Anne by this one moment. And, I did not want to leave her in that place of violence. As a matter of fact, I still don't like to say that she was murdered. I recognize that as how she died, but it's certainly not how she lived. And I most often will say that she was shot and died of her injuries. And so, again, by saying that I wasn't going to define Connor by that one moment, it allowed me not to define Anne by that moment, and to be able to celebrate, her life and not focus on the negative aspects of her death.
For me, Chez, that night started for me on my journey of forgiveness. I remember when we were leaving the intensive care unit for the last time, I had told Kate that I wanted to stay the night because if Anne woke up, I wanted her to hear my voice and not a stranger's voice. Because I had hope. I had faith in God. I knew that He could do amazing things, and I was praying for her recovery, full recovery. And so we walked out of intensive care unit. The first thing I saw was this was about 11:30 at night on Sunday night, and there was 4 priests and a deacon standing there. It was Father Kevin Johnson, Father Mike Foley, Father Will Gansey, and Father Chris Winklejohn, and Deacon Tom McRarity from Good Shepherd. And they all gave us hugs, and it showed me the comfort of the church that they offer to people, and that these men who probably get up very early in the morning are there very late at night to reassure the people that they are there and the church is there. And so that was very comforting for me. And so I stayed the night, prayed a lot, and about 2:00 in the morning, Monday morning, 2 a.m., the machines were, beeping and doing their normal stuff. And I was standing over Anne's bed, and just as clearly as we were talking to each other, I heard Anne say, "Forgive him." Now, this is not an audible voice. This was just us as fathers and daughters, how we communicate with each other. There are a lot of unspoken words that we clearly understand each other. And as a good father, when she said that, I chose to ignore her because I didn't want to do that. And so she said it again, "Forgive him." And I said, "I don't think so." And she kept saying it. And after about 20 minutes of good father-daughter dialogue and going back and forth, I said, "Okay, I'll try." Because as all fathers know, we can't ever hold out ever completely forever against our daughters when they ask us things, especially when they repeatedly ask these things. We always cave in the end. I hate to say that in public too much for all you fathers out there, that giving our secret away to our daughters, but it is true. And so after about 20 minutes, the machines went back to beeping, and I went back to staying there and praying. And she never woke up. I never heard her, she never woke up and, made sounds or said anything to me. And so I went home the next morning and Kate came the next morning.
So all I can think about as you guys just list with such clarity and as a dad, and somebody, we've all lost people. There is the overriding feeling of grief, but most people don't have to deal with anger at the same time, or maybe people do get angry. They get angry at the disease or the lack of care that they expect or something like that. But there isn't a guilty person they know that they have to feel that anger toward at the same time. So, Deacon Andy, you just said, my first initial mental invitation, I refused, and then I refused again. Can you talk about, and this is what I think a lot of people deal with, is the anger can creep in and creep in and creep in and creep in and overtake the ability, stop the ability to respond with a yes, I can forgive. Did you experience that? Was that anger there, or was the Spirit kind of already kind of just, I don't know, by some miracle pushing that aside or comforting that and allowing you to open up and start thinking about forgiveness?
I think it's still in shock, Chez. I think I was still in shock for the most part. I think I remember my daughter Allison. She had said something about the shooting, and I said, Connor shot Ann, and she goes, "No, he didn't." And I'm saying, "Have you not seen the newspaper?" "Yes, he did." And we kind of went back for a few minutes, and I was kind of in shock that she would say that he didn't shoot Connor. That he did not shoot Ann, Connor. But I kind of realized later what she was really saying to me is the Connor she knew and was friends with could never do such a thing. It had to be somebody else. And I never really understood that at that moment, but I came, and that was a moment, I think, where the Holy Spirit was whispering to me, saying that, this is not what I wish for you. This is not how I want things to turn out. This is not my plan. And so later on, as the week went on Wednesday, we asked the church, what should we do? Because the doctors had told us that who Ann was had disappeared. That the only things that were keeping her organs going was her brainstem, and that the moment she was shot, that who Ann was completely gone. And so we talked to our pastor and our church, and they said, it's your choice what you want to do, but from church teaching, if you wanted to remove her from the life support, you could certainly do that. And let natural causes continue on. And the doctors had told us similar things, that she might live for a day, a week. She was a strong young woman. She might even live for a month just on her brainstem capabilities. So on Wednesday, we gathered our family together, and we told them that we were going to plan on taking her off on life support. And the hospital had chosen Friday to do that. Now, if you remember right, she was shot on Palm Sunday, and so Friday would be Good Friday. The time they picked was 3:00. This story just has no coincidences. This is all God's work in this. It's just incredible what He has done. And so Thursday, I was in there praying again over her bed, and I was actually praying with Father Will Gansey at the time. And he was praying there too. And I remember standing over Ann's bed. This was in the afternoon, and various people had come to say goodbye. Because as I said, she was going to be taken off life support the next day. And so I was standing over her bed, looking at her, praying for her. And I remember looking at her in the hospital bed, and what I saw in front of me was a picture, an image of where Christ had semi-imposed Himself with my daughter. I always kind of think it's kind of funny when I say Christ was in bed with my daughter. It's a little tongue in cheek there, but it was an amazing thing, because I would look at her I would look at her shoulder, and at the end of it was a man's hand, and a man's arm. And it's the same thing for her legs and things. And she was bandaged around the head like Christ was. She was bandaged on her hand like Christ was. And I remember saying, Father Will, Jesus is in bed with my daughter. And he immediately, our clergy are just amazing people. He immediately started kissing her feet, kissed her hand, kissed her head. And for me, I started sobbing. I remember, and it wasn't tears of sadness. It was actually tears of joy, Chez, because I realized right then two things. First, that my daughter would be with Christ forever. And as parents, isn't that what we always want to know? Will our children be in heaven? And so I felt like he answered that prayer for me. And the second thing I realized is that it was Jesus that was talking to me that first night, asking about forgiveness. It wasn't my daughter. And I realized, how can you say no to the divine presence of Christ? It's not possible, I don't think. Standing in the presence of God. And so I said yes. And I just, it was, my heart was freed. I just was overcome with joy. And that's why I had so many tears. And then a few minutes later, just like anything else, everything returned back to normal. We went back to praying together. And the amazing thing is, I actually didn't share this story with my wife, Kate, for actually a couple of weeks. She actually had not known this experience. And so she came to me and said that Connor had put her on the list to visit him in jail. And she goes, I'm going to go tomorrow. What do you want me to tell Connor? And it was easy. I said, tell Connor I love him and I forgive him.
And I remember him saying that to me, and I thought, I like that. That sounds good. That's what I want to say. And it's funny that I really didn't think anything odd about it. A lot of people might think just because your husband's a deacon, you have that perfect marriage. And we have been married 42 years, but, we've stuck it out through some really tough times. And, as he said about my decision to return to the church, we haven't always been of the same mind throughout our marriage. But during that whole week, I don't think we ever have experienced the togetherness of thought and intention that we did. Like he said, even though he did not tell me about Monday night either, but we still woke up at the same time every morning, and we would go to Mass first thing before we went to the church. And, we came home and went to bed at the same time. We were caught up in the same event, but it just seemed like words almost weren't necessary, that we were just together in mind and spirit. And so I'm not saying that I expected him to say that he loved Connor and forgave him, but it just didn't seem strange to me. I didn't question it. And I had been going on a different path, that whole week, but in that moment I was at the same place that he was. And I said, yeah, that's good. So I went Friday morning to the jail to see Connor, mostly because I knew we were taking Ann off life support, and I didn't want to be the one to tell him that she had passed away. So I went down to the jail, and I had the oddest thought. It was just a week full of odd thoughts. As I'm walking down the hallway, I'm thinking, Jesus was in jail Good Friday morning. And I was thinking, did anybody come visit him while he was in jail? And I'm thinking, why am I thinking this? But, I think, if we allow ourselves to just be open to the things that, we can ponder later and think about later, that God opens us up to those things. So I went up to see Connor, and, it's very much like you think, the plastic chairs and the glass and the phone. And as he came down the hallway, he was already crying. And he sat down and he said, I am so, so, so sorry. And I told him, I said, Connor, Mr. Grosmaire wants me to tell you that he loves you and he forgives you. I said, and Connor, I love you and I forgive you. And when I said those words, the sense of peace came, the grace washed over me, and I felt it. I felt it. And, people ask, did it stick, and it has. I'm not saying there aren't times when I have to think back to that moment when I forgave, because as I said, Holy Week has changed for us. And, there's events happen and Anne can't be there. So there's always these times when, which gets into the bearing wrongs patiently. It's not like this one thing happened and now it's over. It's like for the rest of our lives, there's an empty space at our dining room table. There's a person missing from all the trips that we take. And in those moments, instead of choosing to become angry and bitter and resentful, I choose to remember that I forgave Connor, that he owes me a debt he can never repay. And the only thing to do in that case is to forgive and give that debt to God, because Connor will surely stand before him in judgment. And God will, will be able to deal with it. And I am able to move on with my life. I can be a mother to my 2 daughters. I tell people I didn't want to be the grandmother that nobody wanted to come visit, because I'm always, I'm that angry, resentful, bitter person. And I think we all know people who haven't been able to move past events in their life. So my conversation with Connor was very brief. And in our case, again, it was also very helpful that he was sorry for what he had done. The second part of forgiveness is reconciliation. And just because you forgive doesn't mean you have to reconcile. It also doesn't mean that you have to have a relationship with that person. But because Connor was sorry for it, I think that also helped us in our process. So I went back to the hospital, and we had people gathered around in her room. My mom, his sister, my sister, Dr. Brian Sheedy, who is another Good Shepherd parishioner who happens to be the palliative care doctor at TMH. So again, surrounded by, people we know. Father Will and Father Chris, again, were there to say the final prayers. And then, of course, the nurse who's going to take the tube out. And so as Deacon Andy said, they had told us it could be hours, it could be days. And, again, it's just not something you're looking forward to, having to do. And when she took the tube out, she turned to Father Will and she said, "Is there something you're going to do?" And she says, "You need to do it now." And that's when I realized that it wasn't going to be hours. It wasn't going to be days, that it was happening right then. So he said the final prayers, and then he offered her the viaticum, which is the final communion, food for the journey. And he offered it to her in the form of the precious blood. And when he did, her mouth opened and her tongue came out to receive it. Now, she had not made a conscious movement the entire week. And Father Chris said, "Did you see that?" And I realized that was the miracle that the doctor had talked about, that she had been taken out of that place of violence. She didn't have to die alone. She was brought to the hospital for 5 days where she could be cared for and loved, and had loved ones come and say goodbye to her. And in that final moment, she had the ability to receive Jesus one more time. And it was very peaceful. She passed away, just right after that. And you just look at those moments, and you draw your strength from the grace that God gives you in that moment.
Wow. Wow. That is just about the most extraordinary thing I've heard in a while. I've heard your story before, guys. I'd not heard that element of the story, which is just unbelievable. And just, I was going to ask Kate, you already beat me to it. I was going to ask about that act of forgiveness and that specific question. Does it stick? Does it stick? And you already kind of made mention that it has, because I've chosen to live in that place of forgiveness and made that conscious choice. I think maybe sometimes folks who have been wronged so severely that there is an active then legal, I'm assuming there was a trial or, there was a sentencing, all these kinds of things. They wait for future moments to perhaps heal them. A sentence or the execution of justice can maybe fill in the gaps there or something like that. And it seems like what you said there is that even that first choice of forgiveness must be repeated, and that this wrong has to be borne patiently over time. So maybe to talk just briefly as we start to conclude, is this your experience of restorative justice in the years afterward, and how that's maybe been an accompanying piece of the bearing the wrong patiently, is to see maybe restoration happen in Connor's life.
I think one of the things that helped us was Father Allison DeFore, who's an Episcopal priest, was presented to us. Someone said that we should contact him because he is the priest for Wakulla Prison, and we were thinking about, helping Connor get into a faith and character-based prison. But he introduced us to restorative justice, which is a different way of looking at things. The criminal justice system says what crime was committed, who did it, and what's the punishment for that. Whereas restorative justice is like what harm was done, who was harmed by that, and what can we all do to repair that as much as possible. Andy was taking a Catholic moral theology class at the time. And so he asked his professor if he could write a paper about restorative justice. And he said, yeah, sure, write a paper about it. So it served a twofold purpose. It gave us an introduction to it and how it works. And it gave Andy an opportunity to earn another A for his class. And the two things about restorative justice, because we could do a whole session on that, that appeal to us is Andy wanted answers. What happened? How did we get to this point? And in a traditional system, you don't get those answers. So, you talk about a wrong that's been done. I mean, even something like an assault or a burglary, or, you'll never know, why did you pick me? Why did they come here? And we didn't know what happened to Anne, between the last time we saw her and the time we saw her in the hospital. And usually Connor would have been coached not to say anything. And so people are left with those unanswered questions. And so, talking about bearing a wrong patiently when you can't have that answer. So restorative justice, we had a circle, and in that circle, we were allowed to ask Connor questions. So we were allowed to get those answers. So in a way that, that provided some comfort for us to at least know what the answers to those questions were. For my side, the other thing that restorative justice does is it allows the victim to participate in deciding what the sentence is, and not just the victim, but also the offender. So we sat in the circle and we talked about what it meant to lose Anne, what that meant for our lives to lose her. And Connor had to listen to that. And he says that it's the hardest thing he's ever had to do. And this is a man who's been in prison for 15 years. And sitting in that circle and listening to us, facing us, was the hardest thing he'd ever had to do. He answered the questions. They got into a fight because Connor wasn't as excited about her making the dean's list as she wanted him to be, which probably snowballed into a fight about everything. And both being 19 years old, they just didn't have the skills to be able to walk away. Connor got his father's shotgun and loaded it, saying that he was going to kill himself. Anne said she didn't want to live if he was going to kill himself. He pointed the gun at her and said, "Is this what you want?" She said no, but Connor said, "I was just so tired of arguing," that he just pulled the trigger. And of course, there's no effort to that. And a half a second later, he regretted what he had done. So we got those answers. And we also got to participate in his sentencing, because to me, to have him sit for the rest of his life in a jail cell meant nothing. That did not do anything to make up for what he had done. Nothing could. Restorative justice, they do try to restore, but especially in our case, you're not going to restore her life. So what can you do instead? And so what we asked for were conditions of probation, which included anger management classes, speaking about teen dating violence, and then volunteering in those areas where Anne would have had she lived. And in the end, he was offered 20 years, day for day, and he still has 5 years left in that sentence. And then terms of probation, which included those three things. He has already taken anger management classes while incarcerated. He has made a public service announcement while incarcerated. And I tell people, while he hasn't been able to volunteer in those areas that Anne would have, he volunteers extensively in prison. So, I tell people Anne didn't have to die for Connor to become a good Christian young man, but God will work for good in all things. And with our forgiveness of him, it released him from having that focus of being angry at us because we're angry at him. And he had to, reflect on his own accountability. And through that, and through our forgiveness, recognize that it was through God's grace that this all happened. And he was he joined the church, became Catholic. Deacon Andy was his sponsor, and we're still in communications with him. And the thing is, we don't have to be, we just choose to be. Again, just because you forgive someone doesn't mean you have to have a relationship. But when you have that you have forgiveness and you have someone who's contrite, then you can have that, you can experience that reconciliation. So with regard to, continuing on this path, certainly there is a sorrow in our lives. And, like I said, the emptiness. And I always like to think about the story that St. Francis tells of perfect joy. And perfect joy is being able to unite our suffering with the suffering of Christ on the cross to work for good. And so I think about that. I think about the times when I'm feeling sad, when I'm grieving, when, I think, Christ suffered for us, and in this moment I can take that suffering and I can unite it with his suffering on the cross, and I can pray that he uses it in whatever way that he wants to. And anytime you give something to God, he willingly takes it. He willingly takes it and will use it for good. And I know that that's just helped me over the years when these moments come up. But, that the act of forgiveness, whether it miraculously comes in that first week, I know people say it's radical. And, looking back on it, it is radical. But, whether it's in that first week, that first year, whenever it is that you choose to forgive, and we've seen it, in talking with people who have been able to forgive family members, there is always a peace that comes behind it. And knowing that truth, knowing that peace comes from forgiveness, will always lead me to forgiveness in every circumstance.
Amen.
Wow. I dare not say anymore. The problem of evil, the mystery of evil is such, it's the great philosophical problem for a lot of people. For them, their ability to believe in God is just like, they would hear something like this, be like, see, like, it's just not possible. Like, how could God allow something like this? And the Christian response is never really an elaborate philosophical response. The Christian response is always to point at the cross and say, yes, but the cross exists. And as you said, Kate, as you said, Deacon Andy, like, we can participate in the same acts of forgiveness and bearing of wrongs patiently that Christ himself did. And he alleviates the burden by the mystery of grace. Like he makes things, he can heal. Doesn't, like, as you said already, like the sorrow you will feel will always be there. The thing that happened will always have happened, but that healing through forgiveness is real. And it's the great Christian answer to that problem of evil and the mystery of evil, the mystery of split-second decisions we regret immediately afterward, that change everyone's lives. So, guys, I don't know if I've ever heard a more eloquent witness and a more spirit-filled witness to the act of forgiveness. I just thank you. Incredible.
Hey, Chaz, I did want to say one more thing. You talk about bearing wrongs patiently going forward. I would never be a deacon if I had not chosen forgiveness. I mean, that was in my second or third year of the formation. If I was an angry man, I would believe the church would discern that we don't need an angry deacon. In 99% of marriages fail when a child dies in the marriage. As Kate said, we're married 41 years now. Our marriage survived the thing that most marriages will fail, almost guaranteed. And so, it just, I don't know how anybody could choose anything else. I just don't, living through it and going through it and continuing it, as you said, bearing the wrongs patiently, but seeking, as Kate said, comfort in the cross and the sufferings and knowing that God means good from all things.
And I think one of the things that Deacon Andy frequently says is that if we hadn't forgiven, we would have gone to prison with Connor. And so when you can, if you think about bearing wrongs patiently, it's like, yes, that person hurt me, but I'm choosing not to allow them to have room in my heart. I'm not allowing them to possess me in any way. And I'm not, whatever prison they may be in, I'm choosing not to walk into that cell with them.
Good. Incredible. Yeah, and that is one thing, the ripple effects oftentimes when there's something like Deacon Andy that you pointed out, that marriages do often suffer the worst in the aftermath, and to again acknowledge that, like, there's so many people saved in your act of forgiveness, but especially, the two of you being able to be joined together in forgiveness is such a powerful witness to the sacrament of marriage and how robust and strong sacramental grace within our marriages can be, to get us through unthinkable things. That the burying of a daughter is just absolutely, it's the worst for any married couple. We would rather be homeless, than so, wow. Well, guys, to conclude, I just want to invite to all of our listeners, this is something, there's probably, maybe it's you, but probably somebody in your life who just has not been able to move past a moment of hurt, a wrong that was done to them that just seemingly has stopped their ability to move forward. Share this episode with them, just as an act of mercy, an act of assistance. Like, it is possible to forgive and to live in that forgiveness despite all the anger and sorrow and pain. So I just invite you, just as an act of Christian help. If there's somebody in your life struggling with this, please do share that. So once again, guys, thank you. A final thank you so much for sharing this. As you've shared so many times over the years, blessed so many people with this story. We couldn't be more grateful.
It's great to see, Chaz, and it's great to have this time to talk with you and all the people of the diocese.
And this is Anne's legacy, so we're always happy and willing to talk about the difference that forgiveness has made in our life.
Beautiful. Well, guys, we're concluding this episode. This is episode 99. So that means episode 100 is coming next. We hope you guys have a beautiful Holy Week, a beautiful celebration of our Lord's Passion, Death, and Resurrection. We will see you back here in 2 weeks' time to celebrate 100 episodes of the Gaudium et Spes podcast. So take care.
Thank you for tuning in today to the Gaudium et Spes podcast. If you would like to know more about our podcast, please visit our website, gaudiumetspes.net, or go to ptdiocese.org and click the button that says podcast. If you listen to the audio version from an app such as Apple Podcast, Spotify, or iHeartRadio, be sure to rate, review, and comment. If you watched us on YouTube, be sure to like and subscribe or leave us a comment there as well. Thank you for joining us.